This video is sponsored by MSI. Alright, so MSI recently reached out to me if I wanted to feature their MSI Katana GF66 gaming laptop and see how it'll handle NVIDIA's ray tracing and DLSS using the NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3070Ti. And since it has been a while since I've done this, it always piques my interest to experience RTX in a very objective manner, so yeah, I said yes. So in today's video, I'll be featuring the MSI Katana GF66 with an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3070Ti graphics and a 12th Gen Intel Core i7 12700H processor. We're gonna test it in God of War, Hitman 3, and Cyberpunk 2077. With that being said, let's get into it. The packaging is fairly simple, just a brown box with some branding. Inside it we have the MSI Katana GF66 itself, an accessory box, and the paperwork. Inside the accessory box we just have the power cable and the 180 watts power brick. Now at first look and touch, the MSI Katana GF66 features a fairly minimal design with a smooth surface on top and a subtle MSI Dragon logo. It is made mostly out of hard plastic materials, which makes it relatively lightweight for its size. I also like the curved edges and slight polygonal design around the front side. Speaking of the front side, here's how it looks. Unfortunately, you cannot open the lid using just one hand because the hinges are quite strong for its weight. Here on the left side, we have a USB 2.0 port, a USB 3.2 Gen 1 port, exhaust ventilation, and a DC power port. On the other side, we have a 3.5mm audio combo jack, a USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type A port, a USB 3.2 Gen 1 Type C port, an HDMI port, and an Ethernet port. On the back side, we have two exhaust ventilation, and we actually have some vents as well here underneath the display that is also visible when the lid is closed. Now, flipping it all over at the bottom, we have what I feel like is one of the best bottom intake ventilation designs on a laptop. Not only does this honeycomb design looks cool, but it also has an ample amount of ventilation all across the bottom, and they are substantial enough that you can see through the Cooler Boost 5 cooling solution with 2 fans and 6 heat pipes overall. Of course, we also have some rubber feet and plastic stands around. And lastly, here at the bottom, we have the stereo speakers. Moving on, opening the lid reveals the integrated peripherals, including a full-size keyboard with dedicated numpad, arrow keys, full-function rows albeit smaller than usual, and a wider control key specifically made for gaming. What I like about this keyboard is that it has a dedicated power button and a max fan speed shortcut on the arrow key. The keyboard itself has a good amount of bouncy and tactile feedback. We also have the trackpad here, also with some nice tactile feedback and a smooth surface. Now looking at the display, first the bezels around are fairly thin, especially on the sides, with a thicker bottom bezel that also has a modern MSI logo at the center. The top bezel is just thick enough to accommodate the HD webcam and the microphone array. Now in terms of the display quality, it is also pretty decent, and as per my testing, it covers 98% sRGB, 68% NTSC, 73% Adobe RGB, and 74% of the P3 color space. Color calibration out of the box is kinda off though, so you might have to manually calibrate this using a tool like what I have here, which is the Datacolor Spider X Pro. Overall, it features a 15.6-inch Full HD IPS level display with up to 240Hz refresh rate and has good enough color reproduction, decent viewing angles, and a substantial amount of contrast, details, and sharpness, good enough for gaming. Now, before we head into our main event, which is to test this laptop with ray tracing and DLSS, let me break down its main specifications. The MSI Katana GF66, at least for the variant that I have here, features an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3070Ti graphics and a 12th Gen Intel Core i7 12700H processor. It also has 16GB 3200MHz RAM, 1TB NVMe SSD, and a 15.6-inch Full HD IPS level display with up to 240Hz refresh rate. Now finally, let's test how this laptop performs with ray tracing and see how DLSS affects both the performance and image quality so that you can have a better understanding of how these technologies work and the best possible settings that you can use. I've done this testing and comparison a few times in the past, and it's always fun to see this in action, and this time we're gonna test it on God of War, Cyberpunk 2077, and interestingly, Hitman 3 demo, which actually allows you to do some benchmarks and play a demo game with ray tracing enabled, which is awesome. Now, ray tracing and DLSS are definitely not a new technology and have been out for a while now, but for those who are not yet familiar, it is essentially an advanced technology for the real-life rendering of light and shadows, making computer-generated images look realistic than ever before. So reflections are more realistic, Lights and shadows follow the correct path in relation to their obstructions and basically make everything more lifelike. Here, let me show you. Let's start with Hitman 3 demo. First, let's set a baseline by checking how the game looks with RTX off and DLSS off. Notice how the lighting, reflections, and shadows look, and as you can tell, the scene is pretty well lit all around, which is good in its own way. You can see everything fairly well, which definitely helps with the overall gameplay. Now let's turn on RTX with reflections and sun shadows, but with DLSS off for now, so that we can see the best possible image quality. As you can see, the lighting, shadows, and reflections are now more realistic, especially on the golden design on the ceiling and on the stairs. Also, notice the lighting on the back of the main character. Ray tracing added more depth and separation to almost all the objects around the environment. However, as you can tell, it made a huge impact on our frame rate. We've got around 158 FPS with RTX off and only 40 FPS with RTX on. Mind you, this is still with DLSS off. Speaking of DLSS, this is where it matters the most. DLSS stands for Deep Learning Super Sampling, which is the image rendering technology used by NVIDIA to essentially render a lower resolution image comparable to its native resolution. This is done by taking advantage of the dedicated tensor cores on the NVIDIA GeForce RTX graphics cards like what we have in this laptop, the NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3070Ti. Later, I'll show you a better example of how it works in God of War, but for now, let's quickly see how it improves our frame rate here in Hitman 3 with ray tracing and DLSS on. So now with DLSS on and set to quality, as you can see, our frame rate jumped from the 40s to the 50s, which is awesome. And as far as I can tell, there's no significant difference in terms of the overall image quality. Later, I'll show you a side-by-side comparison, don't worry. Now setting DLSS to balance, our FPS improved a bit to around the typical playable 60 FPS. Changing it to performance, bump it a little bit further, still around the 60s. And finally, setting it to ultra performance, we're almost hitting the 70s. Again, turning off DLSS brings our FPS down to the 30s and 40s, which is still kinda playable, especially on this slow-paced stealth-like game. But honestly, I'll just take advantage of DLSS at quality setting. Here's another testing using the built-in benchmark of this game. First, RTX on with DLSS off, we're averaging around 36 to 37 FPS. In quality, we're getting around 52 FPS, which is already a significant improvement. In balance, we're getting almost 60 FPS. In performance, we're getting about 64 FPS. And finally, in ultra performance, we've got a 10 FPS improvement of around 74 FPS. Now, here's a quick side-by-side comparison between the image quality difference of each DLSS setting. As per my experience, DLSS quality is the best compromise between frame rate and image quality. And honestly, I'd stay away from ultra performance as much as possible because of the noticeable degradation to image quality, and I feel like it defeats the purpose of what we are trying to achieve here with ray tracing, which is to get the best visual fidelity possible. And before we move on to the next game, here's another RTX on and off comparison. Again, notice the difference in terms of the lighting, reflections, and shadows. Alright, so let me show you how DLSS work in God of War. I've set it to the ultra settings for the maximum image quality, and as you can see here, with DLSS off, the game is rendering in its native 1080p resolution, and it goes down as you change in between different DLSS settings. The resolution with DLSS quality is HD 720p, 626p at balanced, 540p at performance, and 360p at ultra performance settings. Again, DLSS renders the image at a lower resolution while trying to maintain a close to native resolution image quality. Now, this scene in my opinion is a good way to show you the differences between these settings because of the number of textures and details in this particular scene. So here's how it looks with DLSS off, basically native resolution. Then quality, balanced, performance, and ultra performance. Here's a side-by-side comparison, and interestingly, it looks like the image on the DLSS quality is even better than with DLSS off, which is cool to see. Like I said, in my opinion, DLSS quality is probably the best settings when it comes to the overall balance between image quality and performance. Speaking of performance, here's a quick comparison between these different DLSS settings. With DLSS off, we're getting around 57 FPS. In quality, we're getting about 61 to 62 FPS. In balance, we got a 1 FPS bump to 63 FPS, another 1 FPS improvement with performance, and a significant bump with ultra performance with around 67 FPS. Again, I'll probably stick to the quality setting for this game. By the way, this game looks really good, and I think I'm gonna finish this game even after this feature video. The graphics, fight scenes, and the storyline is definitely interesting. And last but not the least, what better way to test and feature the RTX on and off other than the Cyberpunk 2077, which probably has the most amount of lighting and reflections in a game. I actually found a perfect scene here with a car and a street light. Currently, our setting is set to Ultra with RTX and DLSS off. So notice how the light shines on the car, around it, and most especially underneath it. Realistically speaking, I'm pretty sure there shouldn't be a perfectly spread out illumination underneath the car, right? Especially at this particular angle. And if we turn RTX on at Ultra setting, as you can see, it is definitely more realistic. The lighting, reflections, and shadow look how they should be given the particular angle. And if you go around the car, the same can be observed, which is absolutely mind-blowing. We even have a defined shape on the shadow of the car, which is non-existent with the RTX off. And as you look around the car, the illumination doesn't just spread across the entire roof and follows the path of the light properly. Very nice to see it in action indeed. Now, would you notice this difference when actually playing the game? Probably not, but it's definitely interesting how technology has evolved when it comes to graphics in gaming. Here's another example. Look how bland this image looks with almost everything glowing from the sun. And after turning on ray tracing, we now have proper shadows and depth around the environment, making the contrast pop a little bit more. In terms of performance, with the DLSS off, we're getting around 56 to 59 FPS, 60 to 61 in quality, 64 to 65 in balanced, 87 to 89 in performance, and 97 to 98 FPS in ultra performance. So yeah, overall, all the games we featured here can run at decent frame rates with RTX on and with the aid of DLSS, and as I always say time and time again, DLSS quality is the way to go. And there you have it guys. Obviously this is not a full review and more like a feature for the MSI Katana GF66 and how it handles NVIDIA's ray tracing and DLSS. I have limited time with this, but let me know in the comments below if you're interested in a full review. Huge thanks to MSI for letting me experience this laptop and for sponsoring this video. You can get this using the links below. Thank you for watching, subscribe if you like this, and see you next time. Have a great day guys, you're awesome.